Look good, so it's right.
All right, everyone, off your phone.
The middle is the best.
You'll live. It'll be okay.
And then we'll eat around it and they will move.
I'm so
So I do it all my food. Especially my sandwiches. You know, like the middle bite of the sandwich. Be a little surprised.
We're not off our phones yet.
Yes, we are.
I see you're not.
I'm lying.
Maybe if you start keeping
Still on his phone. All right, now no card playing today.
What's hard playing?
Okay. So let's pick up. Actually, I don't think I'm going to take too long here, so I really wanted to give you some time today. So Ford, who was the strangest, he's the only president in American history to not be elected president or vice president. He wasn't elected,
Appointed.
and yet he was president, right? Because the previous vice president had resigned, Nixon named him vice president, and then Nixon resigned. Just an odd set of circumstances that leads to Ford becoming president. And by and large, he is seen by most historians as doing okay. The pardon is iffy, but they sort of see the point. How bad would it look to have a former president indicted and facing criminal charges? Now, you might say, well, if the guy's a criminal, he's a criminal. And that's fine. But presidents are giving pardon powers for a reason. They put that in the Constitution for a reason. And I think most historians see this is one of those reasons. Now, I don't know about the current situation, if impeachment is even on the table. And let's say that if Trump is impeached, that doesn't mean he's removed from office. All that means is there's going to be a trial. Okay, that's the second unlikely hurdle. Impeachment is unlikely. But let's say that the House does impeach him. Then there's a trial in the Senate. Well, right now the Senate's controlled by the Republican Party. That would require Republicans to convict one of their own, which isn't impossible, but again, that's unlikely.
It's probably one of the times it's the most possible.
Yeah, I agree, but I'm going to argue it's pretty unlikely. This is the other reason why Ford is seen basically as praiseworthy, and that is that he signed this treaty with the Soviets called the Helsinki Accords. Helsinki is in Finland. And basically, it was an acceptance of the Iron Curtain line as reality. Okay, Soviets, you get to have your sphere of influence to the right of that line, and we accept that. We will not try to overthrow behind this line. We will contain, right, the policy of containment, which was not the policy that the U.S. had with Japan during World War II, but it is the policy here, right? We'll just keep you where you are, as long as you promise that people under your control will be treated well. So this concept of human rights. Think about this: 1,000 years ago, if the Kingdom of France decided to slaughter all Jews, would Britain say, "Hey, you can't do that to Jews"? And of course, the answer is no, because it's in France. Who are we to tell the French what to do within their border? But one of the great lessons of World War II is this: you do not get to do whatever you want just because there's this magic line that says you're in control. The Hitler group, right, the Nazis, wiped out groups of people, and then their argument, well, they made two arguments when they faced the Nuremberg trials. One was, we were ordered to do it by our superior officer. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. If you're given an immoral order, you need to disobey. And then the second great thing about the Nuremberg trials was this: you don't get to do whatever you want just because you're the ruler of a magic line on a map. You are subject to Earth's rules. That's the great lesson. So apply that to this. Okay, Soviet Union, we accept that you're in control of everything to the right of this red line, but you have to promise that you will respect human rights. And the Soviets said, deal. And did they? No, absolutely not. But before you're too critical, what should Ford have done about it? To get the promise was an accomplishment. Now at least we could say to the Soviets, you didn't honor the agreement. And as a result, we can't trust you, and we're going to have to adopt policies, maybe economic policies that are hostile to your point of view. Are we going to go to war over Poland? Right? Are we going to go to war over East Germans? They're Nazis. They were Nazis, right? So let's not be too critical of that. The second thing that happened under Ford's watch is the end of the Vietnam War, and I mean the end of the end. Right? I already told you that American soldiers were up by 1973, but I did tell you that the Vietnam War lasted 2 more years. The South Vietnamese carried on the fight. The one American presence was the American embassy. And you are looking at a photograph of the last helicopter that was going to leave the American embassy. So what I'm telling you is this. So the American embassy is in Saigon, which is the capital of South Vietnam. And it was the last stronghold of the South Vietnamese army. The North had successfully invaded the South and defeated the South Vietnamese army, and they're closing in on the capital city, Saigon. So it's time to get out of Dodge. It's time for the Americans to close up shop and get out of Dodge. And so all these thousands of South Vietnamese officers, politicians, needed to get out of here, because if they stayed, they'd be executed by the North Vietnamese military. These people all think they're getting on that helicopter. It ain't happening, right? That helicopter might seat 10 people, right? And if you have time and you care to do so, watch some old YouTube footage of when these helicopters left, right? So back map here for a second. So they left, Saigon's right about there, and where they fly, they flew to aircraft carriers which were in this body of water right here. And the aircraft carriers then took them to the Philippines, where there was a huge American naval base. Well, all these helicopters were landing on the aircraft carriers. They didn't have room. You know what they did with the helicopters? Pushed them off. Pushed them off into the ocean. So check that out, right? Type YouTube search, Vietnam helicopters pushed in ocean. And check it out. It's amazing. And these aircraft carriers were looking at the sky, and all these helicopters are flying in, and they're looking like, who are these people? I don't know. Well, if they don't shoot at us, they're probably not an enemy, and let them land, right? I've always wondered, too, about who took this picture. And I found out an American took this picture. Well, obviously, the American didn't get on the helicopter, so what happened to this guy? And this photograph ran in the New York Times, so he ended up taking more pictures, and what he found running through the streets of Saigon were naked men, just running everywhere. Not butt naked, they had their underwear on, but they were naked. And at first he was like totally confused, like, why are you running around naked? And then it dawned on, get it? Does it make sense to anyone? Was it just hot that day? No one knows. I'll give you a clue. There were military uniforms all over the streets.
Protesting.
No.
Showing.
What?
They don't want to be shown.
Yeah. Right? When the North Vietnamese army would stop a guy who's naked, they'd say, are you a soldier for the South Vietnamese army? Oh, me? No. Why are you naked?
So it's shooting.
That picture is an actual video.
It's a video, yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yep. A lot of these are videos. Okay. I've heard this argument before. Well, the U.S. didn't really lose the Vietnam War because, one, we were out 2 years early. The war lasted 2 more years. And then 2, it was never really a war. It was a conflict. I mean, we never declared war. Okay, fine. It was a great victory. Back in Realityville, it was a loss. We lost the Vietnam War. However, there's this other argument that goes something like this. We showed the Soviets that we were willing to go anywhere and everywhere to fight communism. And you better do the same, Soviets. And their economy went bankrupt trying to confront us everywhere we were, which led to the collapse of the Soviet Union, which led to the win of the Cold War. In other words, lose the battle, win the war. Lose the battle of Vietnam, win the Cold War. Synthesis. Remember how Grant won the Civil War? He told Lincoln, when Grant was finally hired as the commanding officer of the Union Army, he told Lincoln, do not fire me after I lose a bunch of battles, because I'm going to. I am going to lose a bunch of battles, but I'll win. I'll win the war, because they will run out of supplies before we do. We'll just confront them, and confront them, and confront them, and confront them, and they'll run out of supplies. They'll run out of bullets. They'll run out of soldiers. And they'll win battles, and they'll win battles, and they'll win battles, and then they'll be done. Same thing. Right? The idea of the Cold War being the war. Okay? Any questions? But of course, Ford did not win. I can't say re-election because he was never elected. He did not win the next election. Jimmy Carter won the next election. People by and large blamed Ford for Nixon. You're the same party as Nixon. Nixon's a criminal. You pardoned him. Your fault. So this guy named Jimmy Carter becomes president. And he had a mixed record as well. Does anyone know what we're looking at here? That's the Panama Canal. You're looking at one of the reasons why they decided to put the Panama Canal in Panama. I mean, one is obviously it's narrow. But another one is there's a natural body of water in the middle of Panama. So you didn't have to dig the canal all the way through, just about half the way through. And then the other half would be the natural body of water. It was under Carter that the U.S. agreed to give the canal to Panama. And in Panamanian ears, that's not right. You didn't give us anything. It's ours. You didn't give us. Giving us it means it was yours, and then you decided it's not yours anymore. In Panamanian ears, they were getting back what was rightfully theirs in the first place. Difference of technicality here, I guess. So, number one, Carter largely praised, not universally praised, by the way. People critical of Carter said, why are you giving away something that the U.S. built? Carter's point was, it's a way of improving our relationship with a foreign country. Come on, let's stop being America the policeman that gets to dictate to everyone our view, and our view is the right view, that's it. So we turn over the canal to Panama. Number two, he's widely praised for this event. So that's Jimmy Carter. This guy here, that's a fun name. Let's practice. His name is Menachem Begin. Menachem. Really try and get the phlegm out of your throat. Menachem Begin. Go ahead. Menachem Begin. Oh, we're awake today. All right. Anyway, that's the leader of Israel. And that is Anwar Sadat. Later on, he would be assassinated by Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda existed at this time under a different name, but Al-Qaeda. That's the leader of Egypt. That's the leader of Israel. That's the leader of the U.S. And those are the hands. They're playing a game of. That's not true. But this is a remarkable picture. This is kind of unbelievable. Can you imagine a picture today of President Trump shaking hands with the leader of Al-Qaeda, Abdar al-Baghdadi? Although Osama bin Laden's son is trying to make a vie for the leadership, right? Can you imagine a picture where they're shaking hands with each other with some neutral party, right? No way. They look at each other as illegitimate leaders of terrorist organizations. Same thing here, right? The fact that an Egyptian president, this is Egypt, is shaking hands with the leader of Israel because of some history between the two is remarkable. They have fought several wars against each other. They're enemies, and here they are, shaking hands of one of the great peace agreements that has ever occurred in modern world history, and that is the Camp David Accords. Have you ever heard of Camp David? Camp David is a huge park in Washington, D.C., and it's where the president goes when he wants to get away from the press. No press are allowed there. It's just a big old park. And Carter brought the leader of Egypt and Israel to Camp David for a number of days and hammered out this agreement. And it's kind of an easy agreement. This chunk of land right here is called, well, does anyone know? What is it called? No one knows. Okay. It's called the Sinai Peninsula. Sinai Peninsula. Okay? There's the word, Sinai. And it belonged to Egypt. It was Egyptian land. Why are you on your phone? Quit it. In 1973, Israel captured it in a war. Okay. Well, the Egyptians and the Jordanians and the Syrians and another group of people called the Palestinians all launched attacks against Israel. Who lost? Oh, they all lost. Oh, yeah. Israel beat them all, by the way. Yeah, Israel beat them all. But still, it was constant. It was constant attacks. Constant attacks. Anyone see a potential deal here? In exchange for? Yeah. It's called the Land for Peace deal. Land for Peace. We'll give you back this. You leave us alone. Deal. Land for Peace. So Israel agrees to give back the Sinai Peninsula. That chunk of land is about the size of, it's about half the size of Wisconsin. Egypt agrees to accept Israel as a legitimate country. Normalize relations, right? You're a country. We accept you. This situation, by the way, continues today. This is a mess. This situation. I mean, it's a whole other history class, and this is American history. But if you're interested in this sort of thing, any of you sign up for World of Conflict next year? It's a good class. Oh, okay. Anyway, the reason it's part of American history is because Jimmy Carter was the one that brokered the agreement. And then oh no, that doesn't look good. The final area where Carter received praise was the country South Africa, which is right above Mason's head, right there, right. You see where it is? It's right there. You see it? Right about. It's right about there. Okay, that's the country South Africa. Have any of you ever heard of this thing called apartheid? Apartheid. Nope. Apartheid. Okay. Do any of you know what segregation was in America? Can you imagine America without Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement? Can you imagine America where the South was never told desegregate? Think of how that America would look. That's South Africa. Okay? South Africa was a segregated country. Only it's even worse in a way than the U.S. when the U.S. was segregated in this way. Can you imagine if the whites were the minority population and the blacks were the majority population, but still the whites had it better than the blacks, right? At least in the U.S., African Americans were the minority population. Whites are the majority population. So I'm not saying this is good at all, but at least it seems a little better than had it been the other way around, where the whites were the minority, and yet they still had control of the country over the majority African Americans. But that's what happened in South Africa. Whites were the minority, about 10%. Blacks were the majority, about 90%, and yet whites ruled over blacks in a government system called apartheid. Apartheid. And Carter didn't like that very much. He thought that's totally unfair. And so it says here that he said to South Africa, Stop it. Stop it. Not only in South Africa, but another country called Rhodesia, which is directly north. This is Rhodesia. This is Rhodesia. That's Rhodesia. Same thing. Right? Remind me, what was the ultimate solution for how the United States dealt with Native Americans? What was the solution? You can't exist. Where do you live? That's right. And what about citizenship? Are you a citizen of the United States? You are dual citizen. Very good. Okay. Same thing here, right? So this is so stupid, but I should have had a map up here. South Africa has these teeny little homelands scattered just like reservations are in the US, and blacks have to live in those little areas. They're 90% of the population. 90% of the population had to live in little homelands while the white 10% got control of a vast majority of the land. And of course, Carter said, that's not right. You can't treat people that way. And I mean, in a way, were we being hypocritical? Because I mean, in the 1970s, it's not like blacks were totally equal, but we weren't this bad. So at least Carter, it seems like Carter had an approach which was, we will hold you accountable if you're not doing the right thing, right? Let's go back. And same thing with Ford. Hey, Soviets, yes, you're in control here, but we will hold you accountable if you're not treating those people fairly. Same thing, Carter. We're going to do the right thing and give this back to Panama. It's their land. We're going to promote peace between two warring countries. We're going to hold South Africa and Rhodesia accountable for how they treat their people within their own country. Okay. It's an interesting approach. And now, last slide. Why wasn't Carter reelected? So Carter was elected in 76 and was not reelected. Well, why not? It's the economy, stupid. I will make this bold prediction. Donald Trump will win re-election if our economy in November of 2020 is as good as it is now. Right now, our unemployment rate is the lowest it's been in something like 50 years. It's under 4%. Right. There are more job openings right now than there are unemployed people. Right? Our economy is doing well. The stock market's doing well. If the economy is doing this well, about a year from now, he'll win. That's why Carter lost. I mean, look at his foreign policy. It looks like he's doing the right thing, but our economy was not good. You are looking at the inflation rate during Carter's presidency. This bump right here, that's Carter's presidency. Inflation is, what's inflation again?
Money worth nothing. Okay,
right. It's how much things cost. Today, the inflation rate is right around 3%. What that tells you, I'll dumb it down, but basically what that tells you is something that costs $1 today, a year from now, will cost $1.03. That's what inflation is. It's the rise in the cost of goods and services. Now, it's a little bit more complex than that, but that's the basic idea. During Carter's administration, it spiked at almost 16%. If you want to buy a house today, you borrow, let's say, $500,000 to buy a nice house. You can borrow money today right around 4.5% interest for a 30-year fixed mortgage. At this time, you want to borrow $500,000, the interest rates were something like 18%. 18%. People can't afford it. And they blamed him. Now, is it his fault? Was he the one that dictated the interest rate? No, but presidents get blamed when things don't go right, and presidents get praised when things do go right. And do they deserve the blame? Do they deserve the praise? But that's the reality. You're the head of state. We're going to praise you if things are going right. Right? I mean, you look at the economy today. Does Trump have anything to do with that? Or is that policies from Obama that are simply in effect right now and Trump's riding the coattails? Maybe. Or maybe it is Trump who's dictating policy. Maybe. Maybe a combination of both. That's probably reality. I'm just telling you that Carter got blamed for interest rates. Carter was sort of, this is 1970s. Carter was sort of forward-looking. Carter in the 1970s said we need to stop importing oil. The 1970s, so that's about 40 years ago. Started saying we need to look at solar and wind, and we need to stop being so energy dependent on other countries. 40 years later, I think we're hearing the same message today, right? Pretty much. Kind of forward looking. Maybe his biggest flaw was this, though. Iran is that country right there. Iran is in the news this morning. Iran is seen as hostile to the U.S. today for reasons we'll explore later when we get to Trump. We have a long history with Iran. Iran had an election in the 1950s. So this has nothing to do with Jimmy Carter, right? Nothing to do with Jimmy Carter. They had an election. And in that election, the guy that won promised to nationalize Iran's oil fields. What does that mean?
Make it their own.
Yeah, make it their own, right? Does the U.S. like that in the 1950s? No, absolutely not. So the CIA overthrew him. The CIA overthrew a democratically elected leader, right? In the great battle of hooray for democracy or boo hiss for communism, the U.S. sided with boo hiss for communism and overthrew that democratically elected leader. Well, do you think the people of Iran were thrilled about that? No, they were pretty angry about that. They were angry towards the U.S. And in 1979, something finally happened. These people surrounding this poor guy that's blindfolded, those are all Iranians. They climbed over the walls of the American embassy, which is an invasion. Embassies are the property of the country. When they climbed over the walls of the American embassy, they invaded the U.S. and took everyone hostage, including that poor guy, right? And they said, basically, all right, U.S., we will give you back your Americans as soon as you give us that guy that they put back in power, that guy that the U.S. put into power. They overthrew the democratically elected guy, and they put some guy in power. He got sick, and he fled Iran, and he went to the United States. So here he is in the United States. And then the Iranians overthrew their government, and they established a government. And they said, look, you give them back to us, we want to put them on trial. As soon as you give them back to us, we'll give you back your Americans. And the Americans said, no. We're not going to do it. We're not going to trade. We don't deal with terrorists. And they were held for a year, a full year. So I explained that the CIA overthrew a democratically elected government. That government that the CIA put in power was overthrown, and Iran became an Islamic-based country. I will tell you that this is the beginning. This is another interesting chapter in what leads to 9/11, right? In the U.S. view, everything's Cold War. You're either a communist or you're not. This did not make sense in the American mindset. Who are these people? Well, they're radical Islamists. Okay, are they communists? Nope. They're radical Islamic people. Nothing to do with communism or capitalism. Does not compute. That doesn't make sense, right? We had no understanding. The CIA really had no understanding who these people were and what they wanted. These people didn't care about capitalism, communism. What they cared about was creating an Islamic-based caliphate kingdom in the Middle East. Right? It's a whole other way of thinking, and we didn't get it. Well, Carter got blamed for this. One interesting story. Carter actually authorized a rescue operation, sent in SEAL Team 6. So the plan was to land in the desert of Saudi Arabia, 2 helicopters. Land in there, reassemble, and then fly, because the U.S. thought they knew where the hostages were. They thought they knew that they were in this building, right? Well, Saudi Arabia is full of sand. When the helicopter landed, there was a windstorm. One helicopter landed, the other helicopter landed right on top of that helicopter. Everyone died. the Marines died. And who got blamed? President got blamed. Now, was he the pilot of the second helicopter? No, but presidents get blamed when things don't go well, and he got blamed. And the third sort of reason why Carter was sort of blamed was because of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. So Afghanistan is right here. It's that green country right there. Back at this time, everything north of that green country was Soviet Union, right? This country was part of the Soviet Union. That is all the Soviet Union. Tell me why the Soviets invaded Afghanistan. To create a buffer state, right? Same thing, same reason why they invaded Eastern Europe. So the Soviets invaded Afghanistan. What we're supposed to be doing is containing them where they are, and they're expanding. They just invaded Afghanistan. Do you know what the American reaction was? To boycott the Summer Olympics, which were in Moscow that year. You invaded Afghanistan? Oh yeah? Well, we're not going to your Olympics. And if you're thinking, that doesn't seem like much of a punishment at all, that's another reason why Carter lost the next election. By the way, that's not the end of the story. The Summer Olympics that year were in Moscow, 1980, Summer Olympics. Back then, the Summer Olympics and the Winter Olympics were the same year. So later that year were the Winter Olympics. They were in New York. We refused to go to the Summer Olympics in Moscow. And by the way, Soviet Union cleaned up with gold medals because, of course, we weren't there. U.S. has won more gold medals than any other country ever. But they cleaned up because there was no American athlete there. And they said back to us, by the way, the Winter Olympics are in New York later this year. We're going. We're not boycotting. We're going. And we're bringing our hockey team with us. That summer, the Soviet hockey team played games against the NHL, professional hockey teams, and went undefeated, beat all of the NHL teams. The Americans in the Olympics made a team of college players from Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Massachusetts. And the Americans beat them in the Olympics. The miracle on ice. I remember where I was. I was 10 years old. I was freaking out. That's the greatest sports moment I've ever seen when the Americans beat the Soviets, because it proved that we were the superior country. We proved that capitalism was better than communism because our hockey team beat your hockey team.
It's when you knew you wanted to be a history teacher.
Right. The goalie for the Soviets was notoriously famous for being just this iron goalie. And in the first period, he gave up 2 goals. And then they pulled him and put in another goalie. He wasn't. I mean, they panicked. The Soviets panicked. They blamed. So obviously we're better.
You could almost say that goalie was an iron curtain.
Yeah. Take that back. Okay. Very good. I'm done. Nice, solid chunk of time here, 20 minutes. Now, you might notice there are no computers in here, and that's because they're in Krivic's room or Kramer's room, but they're ours, but I didn't want to wheel them. So if you need a computer, just go and get one from their room. It's either Krivic or Kramer, I'm not sure which. Otherwise, you got 20 minutes. Think about your paper. Think about your essay. Some of you are doing Kias, and that's great. I'm all done.
So, they turned over the piece of land in Egypt and had
Yeah, might as well just
other
do
countries.
Yeah, so the Egyptians and the Jordanians and the Syrians all attacked the.
Egypt, after they got their land back, restored.
But I don't know if
were
we're
they,
studying
friends?
the document.
I wouldn't call them friends, but right, Egypt accepts Israel as a legitimate country in exchange for getting that land back. And now the Jordanians no longer have the Egyptians as an ally if they were going to attack. And so the Jordanians sort of backed out to that. Well, we don't have a friend to help us. Make sense? It's still a mess today, though.
Pottery. I thought you said that. No, I'm taking possession and we were